Chapter 1. Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi's House. Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi was the owner of Tlokwen Road Speedy Motors, a garage in Gaborone, the capital of Botswana. He had asked Precious Ramotswe, the only lady private detective in Gaborone, to marry him, and, to his great surprise, she had agreed. It was the second time Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi had asked her. Ma Ramotswe had refused the first time. Probably she would never marry again, he had thought. Her first marriage, to a musician named Noti Makoti, had been a disaster. She was an independent woman now, with her own business, the #1 ladies' detective agency. She lived in a comfortable house in Zebra Drive. Men could be difficult to manage, Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi thought. So why would she want to marry? But one evening, after he had fixed her little white van, Ma Ramotswe had said yes. She had given her answer in such a simple, kind way that Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi was sure she was one of the very best women in Botswana. He returned home that evening and thought, I am over 40 years old. Until now, I have not been able to find a wife. I am so fortunate that I must be dreaming. But it was true. The next morning, he knew that it had really happened. Unless she had changed her mind during the night, he was engaged to be married. He looked at his watch. It was 6 o'clock, and the first light of the day was on the tree outside his bedroom window. It would be best to wait an hour or more before he telephoned Ma Ramotswe. It would give her time to get up and make her morning cup of tea. He telephoned shortly before 7. Ma Ramotswe asked politely whether he had slept well. I slept very well, said Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi. I dreamed all night about a clever and beautiful woman who has agreed to marry me. He paused. If she had changed her mind, then this was the time that she might tell him. Ma Ramotswe laughed. I never remember my dreams, but if I did, I am sure that I would remember dreaming about that excellent mechanic, my future husband. Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi smiled. She had not changed her mind. Today, we must go to the President Hotel for lunch, he said. We shall celebrate this important matter. Ma Ramotswe agreed. She said she would be ready at 12 o'clock. Afterwards, perhaps he would allow her to visit his house, so she could see what it was like. There were 2 houses now, and they would have to choose one. Her house on Zebra Drive had many good qualities, but it was rather close to the centre of town. His house was near the old airport. It had a large garden and was quiet, but it was not far from the prison. After their celebration lunch in the President Hotel, they drove off in Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi's pickup truck to see his house. It is not a very tidy house, said Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi. I have a maid, but she makes it worse, I think. And some rooms in this house have engine parts in them. Ma Ramotswe said nothing. Now she knew why Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi had never invited her to the house before. They arrived, and Ma Ramotswe sat in the pickup while Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi opened the gate. She noted pieces of paper and other rubbish in the garden. If she moved here, that would soon change. She would not want people to think that she allowed her garden to look like that. They entered the house and Ma Ramotswe looked around her. They were in the living room. The furniture was old, but good, and on the wall there was a painting of a mountain and a small picture of Nelson Mandela. "This is a very fine room," said Ma Ramotswe. Mr. J.L.B. Mattacone looked pleased. "I try to keep this room tidy," he said. "It is a special room for important visitors." "Do you have many important visitors?" asked Ma Ramotswe. "There have been none until now," he said, "but it is always possible." "Yes," agreed Ma Ramotswe. "One never knows." She looked over her shoulder, towards a door that led into the rest of the house. "The other rooms are that way?" she asked politely. "That is the not-so-tidy part of the house," said Mr. J.L.B. Mattacone. "Perhaps we should look at it some other time." Ma Ramotswe shook her head, and Mr. J.L.B. Mattacone realized that there could be no secrets in a marriage. "This way," he said. "Really, I must get a better maid." Ma Ramotswe followed him. They came to a room with its floor covered in newspapers. In the middle of the floor, there was an engine. Around the engine were parts that had been taken from it. "This is a very special engine," said Mr. J.L.B. Mattacone. "One day I shall finish fixing it." The bathroom was clean, but very plain. There was a large bar of carbolic soap on the edge of the bath. "Carbolic soap is very good for health," said Mr. J.L.B. Mattacone. "I have always used it." The dining room had a table and one chair, but its floor was dirty. There were piles of dust under the furniture and in each corner. "What does the maid do?" wondered Ma Ramotswe. "The maid cooks for me," said Mr. J.L.B. Mattacone. "She makes a meal each day, and it is always the same meal. But she always seems to need a lot of money to buy food and kitchen things." "She is very lazy," said Ma Ramotswe. "If all the women in Botswana were like her, there would be no men left alive." Mr. J.L.B. Mattacone smiled. He was not brave enough to get rid of his maid, but now she would have to face Ma Ramotswe. They were sitting in the living room when they heard a noise. "That is the maid," said Mr. J.L.B. Mattacone. "She always closes the kitchen door very loudly when she arrives." "Let's go and see her," said Ma Ramotswe. "I want to meet this lady." Mr. J.L.B. Mattacone led the way into the kitchen. A tall woman stood in front of the kitchen sink, filling a pot with water. She was thinner than Ma Ramotswe, but she looked stronger. Mr. J.L.B. Mattacone cleared his throat, and the woman turned round slowly. "I am busy," she started to say, but stopped when she saw Ma Ramotswe. Mr. J.L.B. Mattacone greeted her politely and introduced his guest. "Florence, this is Ma Ramotswe," he said. "I am glad to meet you, Ma," said Ma Ramotswe. "I have heard about you from Mr. J.L.B. Mattacone." "I am glad that he speaks of me," said the maid. "But I am very busy. There is much to do in this house." "Yes, a dirty house like this needs a lot of work," said Ma Ramotswe. The maid looked offended. "Why do you say this house is dirty?" she asked. "Because I have seen it," said Ma Ramotswe. "I have seen the dust in the dining room and the rubbish in the garden. The maid's eyes opened wide. "Who is this woman?" she asked Mr. J.L.B. Matacone angrily. "Why is she coming into my kitchen and saying things like this?" Mr. J.L.B. Matacone looked nervous. "I have asked her to marry me," he said. "Aye!" cried the maid. "You cannot marry her! She will kill you!" Mr. J.L.B. Matacone put his hand on the maid's shoulder. "Do not worry, Florence. Mara Motsway is a good woman, and I will help you get another job. My cousin has a hotel near the bus station. He needs maids, and he can give you a job." "I do not want to work in a hotel," said the maid. "I am a high-class maid who works in private houses. Oh, I am finished now. If you marry this fat woman, you are finished too. She will break your bed, and you will die very quickly." Mr. J.L.B. Matacone was embarrassed by the maid's words. He would speak to his cousin as soon as possible, he thought. He and Mara Motsway went back to the living room and closed the door behind them. "Your maid is a difficult woman," said Mara Motsway. "She is not easy," said Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. "But I think we have no choice. She must go to that other job." Mara Motsway agreed. The maid must go. But she knew that they could not live in this house either. They would rent it to someone and live in her house in Zebra Drive. Her maid was much better than his, and she would take good care of Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. But she had to be careful not to offend him. She would explain that her house was very convenient for the centre of town. That is what she would say. She looked round the room. Was there anything they needed to move from this house to hers? The answer, she thought, was probably no. Mr. J.L.B. Matacone needed only his clothes and his carbolic soap. That was all. Chapter 2. The Boy with an African Heart. On Monday morning, Mara Motsway opened the No. 1 Ladies' Detective Agency. The sign outside the agency said that the opening hours were 9 to 5, and Mara Motsway felt that it was important to keep promises. Actually, clients came only in the late morning or afternoon. Mara Motsway was not sure why. Perhaps it took time for people to become brave enough to enter her door and tell her their problems. So, Mara Motsway sat with her secretary, Mama Kutsi, and drank the large cup of bush tea that Mama Kutsi made every morning. She did not really need a secretary. But Mama Kutsi, who had received top marks in her secretarial examinations, was friendly and loyal. Most important of all, she could keep a secret. Mara Motsway had found this pleasantly surprising, since most people in Botswana like to talk. They were not busy that morning. Mama Kutsi cleaned her typewriter, and Mara Motsway wrote a letter to her cousin in Labatsi. By 12 o'clock, she was ready to close the agency for lunch, when her secretary suddenly put a piece of paper into her typewriter and began typing quickly. This meant that a client had arrived. A thin white woman stepped out of a large car in front of the agency. Mama Kutsi let her into the office, and Mara Motsway stood up to welcome her. "I'm sorry, I haven't got an appointment," said the woman. "You don't need one," said Mara Motsway, reaching out to shake her hand. The woman took her hand in the correct Botswana way, Mara Motsway noted. She had learned something about how to behave. "I'm Mrs. Andrea Curtin," said the woman as she sat down. "The American Embassy said you might be able to help me." Ma Ramotswe smiled. "I am glad they suggested me. What do you need?" "I'm trying to find out what happened to my son 10 years ago," said Mrs. Curtin. "I don't think he is alive, but I want to know what happened." For a few moments, there was a silence. Then Ma Ramotswe said, "I am very sorry. I know what it is like to lose a child. I lost my baby. He did not live." Mrs. Curtin looked down. "Then you know," she said. Ma Makutsi brought 2 cups of bush tea. Mrs. Curtin took her cup gratefully. "I should tell you about myself," she said. "If you can help me, I will be very pleased. If not, I will understand." "I cannot help everybody," said Ma Ramotswe. "I will tell you if I can help." Mrs. Curtin began her story. "I came to Africa 12 years ago. My husband, Jack, worked for the World Bank, and they gave him a job in Africa for 2 years. We came with our son, Michael, who was 18. He had planned to go to college, but we decided that he could spend a year with us in Africa first. The bank put us in a house with a beautiful garden in Gaborone. Michael was like a child with a new toy. He got up early in the morning and walked around in the bush before breakfast. I went with him once or twice. He knew the names of all the animals we saw. We watched the sun come up on the edge of the Kalahari Desert and felt its warmth. I had never been happier in my life. We had found a country where the people had a wonderful feeling for others. When I first heard African people calling each other their brother or sister, it sounded odd to me, but I soon knew what they meant. One day, somebody called me her sister, and I started to cry. Michael started to study Setswana, and he made good progress. His teacher said to me, "Your son has got an African heart. I am only teaching that heart to speak." After a few months, Michael began to spend time with a group of people who lived on an old farm outside Molopolole. I suppose you could call it a commune. There was a girl from South Africa, a German man named Burkhart, and some local people. They were all very serious about growing vegetables in dry ground. They sold their vegetables to hotels and hospitals in Gaborone. One day, Michael told me he wanted to live with them. At first I was worried, but I knew it was important for Michael. So I drove him to the farm one Sunday afternoon and left him there. The farm was only an hour away, and they came to Gaborone every day to sell or buy things, so we saw Michael often. He seemed so happy. When it was time for Michael to return to America for college, he said he did not want to go. He wanted to stay in Botswana for another year. I was upset at first, but Jack and I talked about it and decided to accept what Michael wanted. "He's doing good work," Jack said. "Most young people are completely selfish, but Michael isn't." I had to agree. So Michael stayed where he was, and when it was time for us to leave Botswana, he refused to go with us. I was not surprised. The farm was growing. It gave work to 20 families. And Michael was now in love with a South African woman. Michael wrote to us every week. Then one week, the letter did not arrive, and a day or two later there was a call from the American Embassy in Botswana. My son was missing. I came back to Botswana immediately, and a man from the embassy met me at the airport. He said that Burkhart had told the police that Michael had disappeared one evening after supper. I went to the farm on the day I arrived. Burkhart said he was sure Michael would appear soon. The South African woman had no idea where Michael was. She did not seem to like me. Neither of them could imagine why Michael would disappear. I stayed for 4 weeks. We put a notice in the newspapers and offered a reward for information about my son. A game tracker searched for him for 2 weeks. We found nothing. Most people decided that Michael had either been killed by robbers or taken by wild animals. 6 months ago, Jack died, and I decided to try one more time. I know it was 10 years ago. I do not think I will find Michael, but I want to know what happened. I would like to be able to say goodbye. Will you help me, Mara Motswe? You say that you lost your child. You know how I feel, don't you? It is a sadness that never goes away. For a few minutes after Mrs. Curtin had finished her story, Mara Motswe sat in silence. What could she do for this woman, if the Botswana police and the American embassy had failed? But the woman needed help, and if she could not get help from the #1 ladies' detective agency, then where could she get it? I will help you, she said and added, my sister. Chapter 3. The Orphan Farm. Mr. J.L.B. Maticoni looked out of the window of his office at Clockwen Road Speedy Motors. The window looked into the garage, where his assistants were working on a car. They were doing it the wrong way, he noticed, although he had shown them the correct way many times. One of the assistants had already had an accident while he was working on an engine. He had almost lost a finger, but they still worked in an unsafe way. Young men think they will never die, but they will find out later, thought Mr. J.L.B. Maticoni. They will discover that they are just like the rest of us. The assistants always had their lunch under a tree by the road. They sat and ate and watched the girls walk past. Mr. J.L.B. Maticoni had heard what they said to the girls. You're a pretty girl. Have you got a car? I could fix your car. I could make you go much faster. You're too thin. You're not eating enough meat. A girl like you needs more meat so she can have lots of children. Mr. J.L.B. Maticoni was shocked. He had never behaved like that when he was young. But this was the way that young men behaved now. You could not stop them. He had tried talking to them about it. He said that if they behaved badly, people would think badly of the garage. They had stared at him, not understanding. They thought people could do whatever they wanted. That was the modern way of thinking. Mr. J.L.B. Maticoni looked at his diary. It was the day he always went to the orphan farm. If he left immediately, he could be back in time to check his young assistant's work. They were only doing simple work on 2 cars, but sometimes they liked to make the car engines run too fast. We are not supposed to make fast cars, he had told his assistants. Our customers are not speedy types like you. Then why are we called Speedy Motors? Asked one assistant. Because our work is speedy, he answered. Our customers do not have to wait a long time. He drove to the orphan farm. He enjoyed going there because he liked to see the children, and he usually brought sweets for them. But he also enjoyed seeing Ma Potokwane, the woman who ran the orphan farm. She was an old family friend, and he always fixed things at the farm for her. He was not paid for this, of course. Everybody helped the orphan farm if they could. He arrived and parked under a tree. Several children had already appeared and walked beside him on the way to the farm's office. "Have you children been good?" asked Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. "We have been very good," said the oldest child. "We are tired now from all the good things we have been doing." Mr. J.L.B. Matacone laughed and gave them some sweets. Inside the office, he found Ma Potokwane. She told him there was a problem with the water pump. Then there was a short silence. "I hear that you have some news," she said. "I hear that you are getting married." Mr. J.L.B. Matacone looked down at his shoes. How did she know? It was the maid, he thought. She had told another maid, and now everybody knew. "I am marrying Ma Ramotswe," he began. She's the detective lady, isn't she?" said Ma Potokwane. "I have heard about her. Your life will be exciting. You will be hiding and watching people all the time." "I am not going to be a detective," said Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. "That is Ma Ramotswe's business." After tea, Mr. J.L.B. Matacone went to fix the water pump. It was in a pump house by some trees. He put down his toolbox and opened the pump house door carefully. Snakes liked machines, and he had often found them in places like this. Inside the pump house, he inspected the engine that drove the pump. The problem was that it was very old. He could change some of the parts, but one day Ma Potokwane would have to buy a new one. There was a noise behind him that surprised him. It sounded like the sound of a wheel that needed oil. Then he saw it coming out of the bush, a wheelchair, in which a girl was sitting and pushing herself. She greeted him politely, saying, "I hope you are well, Ra." They shook hands in the correct way. "I hope my hands are not too oily," said Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. "I have been working on the pump." The girl smiled. "I have brought you some water, Ra. Ma Potokwane said you might be thirsty." Mr. J.L.B. Matacone took the water gratefully and watched the girl as he drank. She was very young, about 11 or 12, and she had a pleasant, open face. "Do you live on the farm?" he asked. "I have been here about 1 year," she answered. "I am here with my young brother. He is only 5. "Where did you come from?" She looked down. "We came from near Francistown. My mother died 5 years ago, when I was 7. Mr. J.L.B. Matacone said nothing. Ma Potokwane had told him the stories of some of the orphans, and each time he felt a pain in his heart. In the old times, there were no unwanted children. Everybody was cared for by somebody. But things were changing. Now there were orphans, especially because of the disease that was spreading through Africa. Is this what had happened to the girl? And why was she in a wheelchair? "Your chair is making a noise," he said. "Does it always do that?" The girl shook her head. "It started a few weeks ago. I think there is something wrong with it." Mr. J.L.B. Matacone looked carefully at the wheels. It was clear that they needed oil. "I will lift you out," he said. "You can sit under the tree while I fix your chair." He put the girl gently on the ground. Then he turned the chair upside down and put oil on the wheels. He turned the chair over and pushed it to where the girl was sitting. "You have been very kind, Ra," she said. "I must go back now, or the house mother will be worried." She left, and Mr. J.L.B. Matacone continued his work on the pump. In an hour it was ready, but he knew the repair would not last long. How would the farm get water if the pump stopped working? Chapter 4. The Commune. Ma Ramotswe sat in her office at the No. 1 Ladies' Detective Agency and examined the ring on her left hand. The assistant in Judgment Day Jewelers had wanted Mr. J.L.B. Matacone to spend a lot of pula on an engagement ring with a much bigger diamond. But Ma Ramotswe was not interested in the size of the stone. A tear ran down her face as she thought of the man she would marry. Nobody had ever given her anything like that ring before, she thought. He would be a good husband for her, and she would try to be a good wife for him. She shook her head and turned her thoughts to the day's business, Mrs. Curtin's case. She did not really want to look for the son. Why look for information about the past if it would only bring unhappiness? But since she had agreed to help, she should start at the beginning. This was the commune where Burkhart and his friends had started their farm. She probably would not discover anything, but she might get a feeling for what had happened. At least she knew where to find the commune. It was near Silokwalela, a village in the west, not far from Molopolole. She left early on Saturday morning in her little white van. There was already a stream of traffic, mostly people coming into town for shopping. But a few people were leaving town as well. Ma Ramotswe slowed down. There was a woman at the side of the road waving her hand for a ride. Ma Ramotswe stopped her van and called out, "Where are you going, Ma?" "To Silokwalela," said the woman, pointing down the road. "I am going there too. I can take you all the way." "You are very kind, and I am very lucky," said the woman. As they travelled, Ma Ramotswe spoke with the woman, who was called Ma Tsbargo. She knew a little about the farm. People had thought it would be a success, but it had failed. Ma Tsbargo was not surprised at that. People often give up if things are too difficult. "Is there somebody in your village who can take me to the farm?" asked Ma Ramotswe. Ma Tsbargo thought for a moment. "Yes, there is a friend of my uncle who had a job there." When they arrived at Silokwalela, Ma Tsbargo took Ma Ramotswe to a well-kept house on the edge of the village. They waited at the gate while Ma Tsbargo called out, "Ma Putsane, I am here to see you." A small, round woman came out and let them in. Ma Tsbargo explained to her why they were there. "Yes," said Ma Putsane. "My husband and I both worked out there. But then things went wrong. People stopped believing in what they were doing and went away." "Was there an American boy?" asked Ma Ramotswe. "He disappeared. The police came and looked for him. His mother came too, many times. One time, she brought a game tracker. He was a little man, and he ran round like a dog. He looked under stones and smelled the air, but he found no sign that wild animals had taken the boy." "What do you think happened to him?" asked Ma Ramotswe. "I think he was blown away by the wind and put down somewhere far away. Maybe in the middle of the Kalahari." Ma Tsbargo looked at Ma Ramotswe, but Ma Ramotswe looked straight ahead at Ma Putsane. "That is possible, Ma," she said. "Could you take me out to the farm? I can give you 20 pula." "Of course," said Ma Putsane. "I do not like to go there at night, but in the day it is different. Ma Spargo went to her home, and Ma Ramotswe and Ma Putsane left the village in the little white van. The dirt road was rough, and Ma Ramotswe had to drive slowly. The road ended, and Ma Ramotswe stopped the van under a tree. There had probably been 11 or 12 houses at one time, but now most of them had fallen down. She and Ma Putsane walked to the main farmhouse. It still had a roof and doors, and glass in some of the windows. "That is where the German lived, and the American, and the South African woman," said Ma Putsane. "I should like to go inside," said Ma Ramotswe. They entered the house, feeling the cooler air. "You see, there is nothing here," said Ma Putsane. Ma Ramotswe was not listening. She was studying a piece of yellowing paper which had been pinned to a wall. It was a newspaper photograph, a picture of some people standing in front of a building. She pointed to one of the people in the photograph. "Who is this man, Ma?" she asked. Ma Putsane looked closely at the photograph. "I remember him. He worked here too. He came from Francistown. His father was a schoolteacher, and this one, the son, was very clever. He was friendly with the American, but the German didn't like him." Ma Ramotswe gently put the photograph into her pocket. They went through the other rooms of the house. Some of them had no roofs, and the floors were covered with leaves. It was an empty house, except for the photograph. Ma Putsane was pleased to leave the house, and showed Ma Ramotswe the place where they had grown vegetables. The land had become wild again. All the wooden fences had been eaten by the ants. Only the ditches were left, old and unused. "All that work," said Ma Ramotswe. "And now this." "But this always happens," said Ma Putsane. "Even in Gaborone. How do we know that Gaborone will still be here 50 years from now? Perhaps the ants have plans for Gaborone as well." Ma Ramotswe smiled. "Will the #1 Ladies' Detective Agency be remembered 20 years from now?" she wondered. "Or Tlokwen Road Speedy Motors?" Probably not, she decided. But was that very important? She had come here for information about something that had happened many years ago, and she had found nothing, or almost nothing. It seemed that the wind had blown everything away. She turned to Ma Putsane. "Where does the wind come from, Ma?" she asked. "Over there," Ma Putsane said, pointing to the trees and the empty sky to the Kalahari. "Over there." Ma Ramotswe said nothing. She felt that she was very close to understanding what had happened, but she did not know why. Chapter 5. The Children's Story. On the day that Ma Ramotswe travelled to Silakwalele, Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni felt uncomfortable. He usually met Ma Ramotswe on Saturday mornings to help her with shopping or work around her house. Without her, Gaborone seemed empty. He decided he would visit Ma Putukwane at the orphan farm again. She was always happy to sit down and talk about things over a cup of tea. Ma Putukwane greeted him as he parked his car. "I am very glad that you came today," said Ma Putukwane. "I was going to phone you." "Is it your car, or the water pump?" asked Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni. "The pump. It is making a strange noise. It seems to be in pain." "Engines feel pain," They tell us by making a noise. Then the pump needs help, said Ma Potokwane. Can you look at it? Of course, said Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni. It took him a long time, but at last he was able to fix the pump. It would need to be changed one day, but at least the noise had stopped. Back in Ma Potokwane's office, he had a cup of tea and a piece of cake that the farm cooks had baked that morning. The orphans were well fed, unlike many in other African countries. Botswana was fortunate. Everyone had enough to eat. So, you will be married soon, said Ma Potokwane. You will have to behave yourself, Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni. He laughed, eating the last piece of his cake. Ma Ramotswe will watch me. She will make sure that I behave well. Will you live in her house or yours? Asked Ma Potokwane. I think we will live in her house, he said. It is a bit nicer than mine. It is in Zebra Drive, you know. Yes, I have seen it, said Ma Potokwane. It's quite big, isn't it? There will be room for children. We have not been thinking of that, said Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni. We are probably too old for children. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni wondered if he would have the energy to take care of children. He wanted to fix engines during the day and spent his evenings with Ma Ramotswe. Children needed to be taken to school and put in the bath and taken to the hospital. Would he and Ma Ramotswe really want that? Of course, said Ma Potokwane, watching him as she spoke. You could take an orphan as a foster child. You could give the children to Ma Ramotswe as a wedding gift. Women love children. But Ma Potokwane interrupted. There are 2 children who would be happy to live with you. 2 children. 2? A brother and a sister. We do not want to separate them. The girl is 12 and the boy is 5. Actually, you have met one of them already. The girl in the wheelchair. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni said nothing. He remembered the child, who had been very polite and grateful. But would it not be rather difficult to look after a child in a wheelchair? Ma Potokwane had said nothing about this when she began talking about children. Then she had added an extra child, the brother. And now she appeared to believe that the wheelchair was not important. He stopped himself. He could be the one in that chair. Ma Potokwane had been looking out of the window. Now she turned to him. Would you like me to call that child? She asked. I am not trying to force you, Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, but would you like to meet her again? And the little boy? The room was silent. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni remembered how it was to be a child, back in the village all those years ago. He remembered how the village mechanic had let him clean lorries and mend tires, and by this kindness had helped him find his life's work. It was easy to make a difference in people's lives. Call them, he said. I would like to see them. You are a good man, Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, she said. I will ask someone to bring them here. They're in the fields now. But while we are waiting, I will tell you their story. The Basawa, said Ma Potokwane, lead a hard life in the Kalahari. They have no cows, no houses to live in. When you wonder how you and I could live like that, you will know that these Bushmen are special people. A group of Bushmen had come from the Kalahari to a village near Maun, hunting game. They had a camp a few kilometers outside the village. They had killed some animals and had plenty of meat, so they were happy to stay there, sleeping under the bushes. There were several children, and one woman had just given birth to a baby boy. She was sleeping with him at her side, away from the others. She had a daughter too, who was sleeping on the other side of her mother. While the mother was sleeping, a snake bit her. She died before the baby woke up. The bushman prepared to bury the mother that morning. But when a bushman woman dies and she is still feeding a baby, they bury the baby too. There just isn't enough food for a baby without a mother. The girl hid in the bush and watched them take her mother and her baby brother. They dug a shallow hole in the sand and put the mother in it. The other women cried and the men sang. The girl watched as they put her little brother in the hole too. Then they pushed sand over them both and went back to the camp. The moment they had gone, the girl came out and started digging. Soon she had her brother in her arms. There was sand in his nose, but he was still breathing. She ran through the bush to the road. A short time later, a government lorry came past and stopped. The driver was probably surprised to see a girl standing at the side of the road with a baby in her arms. He couldn't understand what she said, but he took her to a hospital on the way to Francistown. The baby was thin, and the girl had TB, which was not unusual. They kept the children in the hospital for 2 months and gave the girl drugs. Then they let them go because beds in the TB rooms were needed for other sick people. A nurse at the hospital was worried about the children, so she took them to her home and let them live in a small room. The nurse and her husband fed the children, but they had 2 children of their own and not much money. The girl learned the Setswana language quickly. She discovered how to earn a few pula by collecting empty bottles from the side of the road and taking them back to the bottle shop. Sometimes she asked for money outside the railway station, but she preferred to earn it if she could. And although she was still a child herself, she was a good mother to the baby boy. She washed him and made clothes for him. She always carried him on her back and never let him out of her sight. This went on for 4 years. Then the girl became ill. They took her back to the hospital and found that the TB had badly damaged her bones. After some time, she could not walk. The nurse found a wheelchair for her. Now she had to look after the boy from the wheelchair, and he did little things to help his sister. The nurse and her husband had to move. The husband had a new job down in Labatsi. The nurse knew about the orphan farm, so she wrote to me. I said that we would take them, and I went to Francistown to get them just a few months ago. Now they are here with us, as you have seen. That is their story, Mr. JLB Matakoni. That is how they came here. Mr. JLB Matakoni said nothing. He looked at Ma Potokwane. The children's story had affected him deeply. They will be here in a few minutes, said Ma Potokwane. Do you want me to say that you might be able to take them? Mr. JLB Matakoni closed his eyes. He had not spoken to Ma Ramotswe about it, and it seemed wrong to surprise her with something like this. Was this a good way to start their marriage? But here were the children, the girl in her wheelchair, smiling at him, and the boy standing there, looking so serious. He took a deep breath. There were times in life when a person had to do something. This was probably one of those times. "Would you children like to come and stay with me?" he said. "Just for a week or two, then we can see how things are." The girl looked at Ma Potokwane. "Ra Matakoni will look after you well," she said. "You will be happy there." The girl turned to her brother and said something to him that the adults did not hear. The boy thought for a moment and then smiled. "You are very kind, Ra," the girl said. "We will be happy to come with you." Ma Potokwane shouted happily. "Go and pack, children," she said. "Take some clean clothes." The girl turned her wheelchair round and left the room with her brother. "What have I done?" asked Mr. JLB Matakoni quietly. "A very good thing," Ma Potokwane said. Chapter 6. Ma Makutsi's Promotion. Ma Makutsi, secretary of the #1 Ladies Detective Agency and top graduate of the Botswana Secretarial College, sat at her desk and looked out of the open door. She liked to leave the door open, but sometimes the chickens came in. She did not like the chickens. It was not professional to have chickens in a detective agency. "Get out!" said Ma Makutsi. "This is not a chicken farm. Out!" She got up and the chickens moved slowly towards the door. How many top graduates of the Botswana Secretarial College had to push chickens out of their offices, she wondered. She had expected to get a job in one of the modern office buildings in town, but she had received no offers. But some women, with much worse marks on the examination, had found good jobs. Why? "Men run these businesses, don't they?" said one of the other students in Ma Makutsi's class. "I suppose so," said Ma Makutsi. "Men choose the secretaries." "So, how do you think they choose them? By their examination marks? Of course not. Men choose the beautiful girls. To the others they say, 'Sorry, but all the jobs have gone.'" Ma Makutsi had cried that evening. Why had she worked so hard for her top marks? Would she ever get a job at all? The next day, the question was answered. She was offered the job of secretary at Ma Ramotswe's agency. If men will not give you a job, go to a woman. The office was not modern, it was true, but it was certainly better to work in a detective agency than in a bank or a lawyer's office. But there was still this problem with the chickens. "So, Ma Makutsi," said Ma Ramotswe, "I went to Molopolole and found the commune where those people lived. I spoke to a woman who had worked there, and I saw everything there was to see." "And you found something?" asked Ma Makutsi, making a pot of bush tea. "I found a feeling," said Ma Ramotswe. "I felt that the young American was there." "He is still living there?" "No, he is dead, but he is there." Ma Makutsi understood. When we die, we do not leave the place where we were living. A part of us never goes away. She poured the tea and gave a cup to Ma Ramotswe. "Are you going to tell the American woman this?" she asked. "She will ask, 'Where is the body?' She won't understand." Ma Ramotswe looked at her secretary. This is an intelligent person, she thought. She knows how the American woman would think. "I also found this," said Ma Ramotswe. She took the newspaper photograph out of her pocket and gave it to Ma Makutsi. It was on the wall, Those people lived there at the time. There are names below the photograph, said Mama Kutsi. Cephas Kalamani, Marceloy, Oswald Ranter. But even if we find these people, what can they tell us? I'm sure the police talked to them. Maybe they even spoke to Mark Curtin. Mama Kutsi studied the people in the photograph. 2 men and a woman were standing in the front. Another man and woman were behind them, their faces unclear. The names belonged to the people in the front. Cephas Kalamani was a tall, thin man who looked uncomfortable. Marceloy, next to him, was smiling, a hard-working, uncomplaining woman. The third person was Oswald Ranter. He was good-looking and well-dressed, with a white shirt and tie. Like Marceloy, he was smiling, but his smile was very different. I do not like Ranter, said Mama Kutsi. I do not like the way he looks. I know, said Mara Motsway. That is a bad man. Are you going to find him? That is the next thing I shall do. But first, you can help me with some letters. While Mama Kutsi typed the letters, she thought about Oswald Ranter. His name was slightly unusual. It would be simple to look the name up in the telephone book. When she finished the letter, she took out the Botswana telephone book. As she thought, there was only one Oswald Ranter. While Mara Motsway was signing the letters, Mama Kutsi called the number. Is Ra Ranter there, please? She asked. She spoke in a low voice, and Mara Motsway did not hear her. He is at work at the university, said a woman's voice. I am his maid. I'm sorry, Ma, but I have to phone him at work. Can you give me the number? She wrote the number on a piece of paper. Then she made another telephone call and again wrote something on the paper. Mara Motsway, she said when she was finished. Oswald Ranter is living here in Gaborone. He teaches at the university. His secretary says he comes in at 8 o'clock every morning. Mara Motsway smiled. You are very clever. How did you find all this out? I looked in the telephone book. Then I called to find out the rest. That was very good detective work. I am happy that you think so. I want to be a detective. Mara Motsway thought about her secretary. She was intelligent and a good worker. Why not give her a promotion and make her happy? They could buy an answering machine to answer the telephone. I will give you a promotion, said Mara Motsway. You will be an assistant detective, starting tomorrow. Mama Kutsi stood up. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The emotion was too great. Chapter 7. Mr. Badule's Wife. It was the first day of Mama Kutsi's promotion to assistant detective. You are an assistant detective, Mara Motsway had said. But you will still need to type and do other things. That is all right, said Mama Kutsi. I can do all those things, but I will do more as well. I shall have clients. Mara Motsway was surprised. She had not planned on letting Mama Kutsi have her own clients. But maybe it was selfish to keep all the clients for herself. Yes, she said. You can have clients, but not the big clients at first. You can start with small matters. That is quite fair, said Mama Kutsi. I do not want to run before I can walk. Thank you, Ma. Mara Motsway thought she should give Mama Kutsi a client as soon as possible. When later that morning, Mr. Letsenyane Badule arrived, she decided that this would be her assistant's first case. Mr. Badule was nervous as he sat in the client's chair. "You need not feel embarrassed," said Mara Motswe. "Many people come here to ask for help." "Actually," said Mama Kutsi, "it is the strong people who ask for help. The weak ones are too ashamed to ask." Mr. Badule seemed to relax after Mama Kutsi said this. That was good, thought Mara Motswe. She knows how to speak to a client. "I have been very worried," said Mr. Badule. "I have not been able to sleep. I have a question that keeps me awake." "Why don't you tell us about yourself, Ra?" said Mara Motswe. Mr. Badule told his story over a cup of tea. "I am not an important man," he began. "I come from Lobatsi, and my father worked at the High Court as a cleaner. He was a hard worker, and the judge was kind to him. He was kind to me, too. He helped me get a place in a good school. When I passed my examinations, I got a job with the government meat agency. I worked hard. When I saw other workers steal meat, I reported it. My boss was pleased with me and gave me a promotion. After some time, I saved enough money to buy my own shop. Perhaps you have seen it on the road to Lobatsi. It is called the Honest Meat Shop. The shop does quite well, but I have not got a lot of extra money. My wife does not work, and she likes expensive clothes. For many years, we did not have children. But then we had a son. I was proud of him. My son did not do well in school. His teacher said his writing was untidy and full of mistakes. My wife said that we should send him to a private school, but I was worried that it would be too expensive. When I said that, she became very cross. "If you cannot pay for a private school," she said, "I will go to a charity and ask them to pay." "There are no charities that will pay for private schools," I said. "I know one that will, and I will speak to them tomorrow." She went to town the next day. When she came back, she said it had all been arranged. "The charity will pay for him to go to Thornhill," she said. "He can start next term." I was surprised. Thornhill is a very good school, you know. I asked my wife to tell me the name of the charity so I could thank them, but she said that it was a secret. My son liked Thornhill, and soon he was getting good marks in mathematics and writing. I think if he continues to do well, he will get an important job in the government one day. And he is the grandson of a cleaner. I'm sure you are thinking, why should this man complain? He has a well-dressed wife and a clever son. But when I come home from work, and my wife is not yet home, and I wait until 10 or 11 o'clock before she returns, I worry. Because, you see, I think my wife is seeing another man. I know many husbands say that, and they are wrong. I hope I am wrong, but I cannot have any peace until I know if it is true or not. When Mr. Letsenyane Badule left the office, Mara Motswe looked at Mama Kutsi and smiled. "This is a very simple case, Mama Kutsi," she said. "I think you should be able to handle it alone." "Thank you, Mara Motswe," said Mama Kutsi. "I shall do my best." "So, what do you think?" "I think Ma Badule is getting money from somewhere. That means she is getting it from a man. She is paying for the school with the money." Mara Motswe agreed. "So, now you should follow her one day and see where she goes. She should lead you straight to the house of this other man. Find the maid and give her 100 pula. She will tell you everything. Maids like to talk about what happens in their boss's house. Then you tell Mr. Badule." "That is the part I will not like," said Mama Kutsi. Mama Kutsi felt wonderful. It was her first case as an assistant detective. She could not drive, so she asked her uncle to drive her. He was excited about doing detective work and put on a pair of dark glasses. Early the next morning, they drove to the house next to Mr. Badule's shop. They found a place to park across the road and waited in the car. "I have seen many films like this," said the uncle. "The detectives sit in their car and wait patiently. Then somebody starts shooting." "Nobody will shoot," said Mama Kutsi. "There is no shooting in Botswana." At 7 o'clock, a boy came out of the house, dressed in the uniform of the Thornhill School. "Should I make a note of this?" asked the uncle. At first, Mama Kutsi wanted to say that it would not be necessary, but she changed her mind. It would give her uncle something to do. So the uncle wrote on a piece of paper, "Badule boy leaves house at 7 a.m. and goes to school on foot." 20 minutes later, Mr. Badule came out of the house and walked over to his shop. The uncle made a note of this too. They waited for 4 hours. The car was becoming hot, and Mama Kutsi was becoming annoyed by all the notes her uncle was taking. Then they saw Ma Badule leave the house. She got into a car and began to drive into town. Mama Kutsi and her uncle followed her to a large house on Niera Drive. Ma Badule got out of the car and went inside. Mama Kutsi remembered Mara Motswe's advice. The best thing to do would be to talk to the maids and offer them the new 50 pula notes that Mara Motswe had given her. Her uncle wanted to go with her, but Mama Kutsi said it would not be dangerous to talk to a few maids in the middle of the day. He looked nervous as she left the car and went to the maid's entrance. He took out his pencil, looked at his watch, and made a note. Mama Kutsi enters house at 2:10 p.m. There were 2 maids, one of them older than the other. They both stared at Mama Kutsi. "I want to talk to you, my sisters," said Mama Kutsi. "I want to talk about the woman who has come to visit this house." "She is a very well-dressed lady," said the younger maid. "She comes and sits and drinks tea." The older maid smiled. "But she is also very tired. She often has to lie down to rest in the bedroom." The younger one laughed loudly. "Oh yes, there is much resting in that bedroom." Mama Kutsi laughed too. This was going to be easy. "Who is the man who lives in this house?" she asked. "Has he no wife?" "He has a wife all right," said the older maid. "She lives in their village near Mahalepe. He goes there at weekends. This woman here is his town wife." "Does the village wife know about the town wife?" "No, she would not like it. She is a religious woman and very rich. She bought this house for her husband." "But she does not like to live in Gaborone," added the younger maid. "She prefers her village, so he has to go back every Friday, like a schoolboy going home for the weekend." "The man said that if we told his wife, we would lose our jobs," said the older maid. "So we keep our mouths shut." Suddenly, both maids looked upset. "Aye!" cried the younger one. Have you been sent by the wife? No, said Mama Cootsie quickly. I do not know the wife. The other woman's husband has asked me to find out what she is doing. But if you tell him what is happening, said the older maid, he might tell the real wife. That way, we lose our jobs too. And there is a boy who belongs to the well-dressed woman. If you look, you will see that he is the son of the man in this house, not the other man. They both have big noses. The boy comes here every day after school, but does not tell the father that he lives with. That is bad. What will happen to Botswana, Ma, if we teach boys to lie? Mama Cootsie returned to her uncle's car. He had fallen asleep. She touched his arm and he woke up. Ah, you are safe. I am glad that you are back. We can go now, said Mama Cootsie. I have found out everything I need to know. They drove back to the #1 Ladies' Detective Agency. Mama Cootsie had not needed to give money to the maids, so she gave 50 pula to her uncle for helping her. Then she sat down to write her report. The client's wife has been seeing a man for many years. He is the husband of a rich woman who does not know about this. The boy is the son of this man, and not the son of the client. I am not sure what to do, but I think we have 2 choices. A. We tell the client everything. This is what he asked us to do. We have promised to tell him about his wife, and we should keep our promises. B. We tell the client that there is another man, but we do not know who he is. I do not like to lie, as I believe in God. But if we tell the client everything, he will be sad. He will find out that his son is not his real son. Would God want him to be unhappy? And what if the rich woman finds out? She may stop giving money to the real father, and he may stop paying for the boy's school. Then the boy would suffer. For these reasons, I do not know what to do. Mama Cootsie signed the report and put it on Ma Ramotswe's desk. Then she looked out of the window at the trees. She had received top marks from the Botswana Secretarial College, but they had not taught her how to answer a question like this one. Chapter 8. A Trip into Town. On the morning that Mama Cootsie followed Mr. Letsenyani Badule's wife to the house of another man, Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni decided to take his new children shopping. The children's arrival at his home had upset him deeply. He had gone out to fix a water pump and had come back with 2 children. Now he had to take care of them until they were adults. Actually, in the case of the girl in the wheelchair, for the rest of her life. How had Ma Potogwani made him do it? But the children had arrived, and now it was too late to change that. As he sat in the office of Tlokwen Road Speedy Motors, he made a decision. He would stop worrying about how the children had arrived, and think only about how to take good care of them. They were fine children, and their lives had suddenly become better. Yesterday, they had been 2 of 150 children at the orphan farm. Today, they were living in a house with their own room, and with a father. He was a father now, who owned his own business. There was enough money, so why not spend some on the children? They could go to a private school and learn everything they needed to get good jobs. Perhaps the boy... No, he could not really hope for this, but it was an attractive thought. Perhaps the boy would be interested in mechanical things and could run Tlokwen Speedy Motors. For a few moments, Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni imagined his son, standing in front of the garage, cleaning his hands on a piece of oily cloth after fixing a complicated engine. And in the background, sitting in the office, he and Mara Motsway, much older now, with grey hair, drinking bush tea. That would be far in the future. There was much to do before that. First, he would take them into town and buy them new clothes. The children had probably never had new clothes before. Then he would take them to the chemist shop. The girl could buy creams and sweet-smelling soap and other things that girls like. There was only carbolic soap at home, and she deserved better than that. Mr. J.L.B. Matacone took the old green pickup truck from the garage. It had plenty of room in the back for the wheelchair. The children were sitting in front of his house. The boy was playing with a stick, and the girl was making a cover for a milk bottle. She is a clever girl, he thought. She will be able to do anything if she is given a chance. They greeted him politely and said the maid had given them breakfast. He had asked the maid to come in early to take care of the children, and she had agreed. But he heard loud noises from the kitchen, and he knew the maid was in a bad mood. They rode into town. The girl asked questions about the old pickup, which surprised him. "I have heard that old engines need more oil," she said. "Is this true, Ra?" He explained about old engine parts, and she listened carefully. But the boy did not seem interested. When they arrived in town, he parked the pickup next to a big white Range Rover outside the British Embassy. "Do you see that car? That is a very important car," he said. "The owner always takes it to my garage." The boy said nothing, but the girl said, "It is a beautiful white car. It is like a cloud on wheels." Mr. J.L.B. Matacone turned round and looked at her. "That is a very good way of talking about that car," he said. "I shall remember that." The shop assistants were very kind. They helped the girl try on the dresses she had chosen. They were the cheapest dresses, but she said they were the ones she wanted. The boy seemed more interested. He chose the brightest shirts he could find. He wanted a pair of white shoes, but his sister disagreed. "We cannot let him have those shoes, Ra," she said to Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. "They will get dirty very quickly, and then he will throw them away." "I see," said Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. The boy was polite and well-behaved, but he began to think his son would never stand with an oily cloth outside Clockwen's speedy motors. He had another thought of the boy, in a stylish white shirt and a suit. They finished shopping and were walking past the post office when the photographer stopped them. "I can take a photograph for you right here," he said. "You stand under this tree and I can take your photograph. You can have it immediately. A handsome family group." "Would you like that?" asked Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. "A photograph to remind us of our shopping trip?" The children smiled. "Yes, please," said the girl. "I have never had a photograph." This girl, thought Mr. J.L.B. Matacone, was 12 years old, but she had never had a photograph of herself. There was no photograph of her childhood. Nobody had ever taken her picture. She had not been special enough. He had a sudden strong feeling of pity for these children, pity mixed with love. He would give them these things. They would have everything that other children had. He pushed the girl's wheelchair in front of the tree. The photographer waved his hand to get her attention. Then he pushed a button on the camera. There was a noise, and then, as if he was performing a magic trick, The photographer pulled out the photograph and gave it to the girl. She took it and smiled. Then the photographer did the same performance with the boy. "Now you can put those photographs in your rooms," said Mr. J.L.B. Matacone, "and one day we will have more photographs." He turned round to push the wheelchair, but he stopped, and his arms fell to his sides, useless. There was Mara Motsway, standing in front of him, carrying a basket of letters. She had been on her way to the post office when she saw him. What was happening? What was Mr. J.L.B. Matacone doing? And who were those children? Chapter 9. The Bad Maid. Florence Pecco, the bad-tempered maid of Mr. J.L.B. Matacone, had a headache. She had had headaches since Mr. J.L.B. Matacone said that he was going to marry Mara Motsway. Whenever something bad happened, Florence had a headache. When her brother was in court, for example, she had had headaches. When she visited him in prison, there was always a headache. Her brother had been arrested for stealing cars. Why did he have to go to prison? There were many other men who were much worse than he was. There was a long list of bad men in Botswana. She knew some of them. And one of them, Mr. Philemon Leanye, might even help her, she thought. She had met him at a restaurant. He was tired of bar girls, he said. He wanted to meet some honest girls who would not take his money. "Someone like you," he had said. He made her feel special, and they began to see each other. He often disappeared for a month or two, but then he returned with a gift for her. A silver clock, a bag, a bottle of wine. He lived with a woman and 3 children. "That woman always shouts at me," he complained. "I give her money every month, but she always wants more. She says the children are hungry. She is never satisfied." "You should leave her and marry me," said Florence. "I would not shout at a man. I would make a good wife for a man like you." She had been serious, but he laughed. "You would be just as bad," he said. "When women marry, they start to complain. Everyone knows this." Then one time, when he was in trouble, the police talked to her. She told them that he was with her when he was not. Now he would have to do something for her. One hot afternoon, they were in Mr. J.L.B. Matacone's bedroom. "Philemon," she said to him, "I want a gun. Can you get one for me?" He laughed. "Who do you want to shoot, Mr. J.L.B. Matacone? Do you want to shoot him the next time he complains about your cooking?" "No, I am not going to shoot anybody. I want to put the gun in someone's house. Then I will tell the police about the gun, and they will come and find it." "So I won't get my gun back?" "No, the police will take it, but they will also take the person who lives in the house." "What happens if the police find a gun that you are not supposed to have?" Philemon lit a cigarette and blew smoke towards Mr. J.L.B. Matacone's ceiling. "The police don't want people to have guns here," he said. "If they catch you with a gun, you go to prison." "I am glad to hear that," said Florence. "So, how will I pay for this gun?" he asked. "It will cost 500 pula, maybe more. Someone has to go to South Africa to get one. You can't buy them in Botswana." "I haven't got 500 pula," she said. "Why not steal the gun? You know where you can get one. Ask one of your boys to do it. She paused, and then said, Remember that I helped you? That was not easy for me. He looked at her carefully. Do you really want this? Yes, she said. It's really important to me. He put out his cigarette. All right, he said. I'll get you a gun. But remember, if anything goes wrong, you did not get the gun from me. I shall say I found it, said Florence. I shall say that it was lying in the bush near the prison. Maybe one of the prisoners left it there. That sounds good, said Philemon. When do you want it? As soon as you can get it, she replied. I can get you one tonight, he said. Actually, I have an extra one. You can have that. She touched him gently. You are a very kind man. You can come and see me any time. I am always happy to see you and make you happy. You are a very fine girl, he said, laughing. Very bad, very clever. He gave her the gun, as he had promised. It was inside a paper package at the bottom of a white shopping bag. She took it out of the package, and he started to explain how to use it. But she interrupted. I'm not interested in that, she said. All I am interested in is this gun, and the bullets. He gave her some bullets. She liked the way they felt. They would make fine jewellery, she thought, if you put them together on a string. Philemon helped her to put the bullets into the gun, and to clean the gun afterwards, so there would be no marks from her fingers. Then he kissed her and left. She missed him as soon as he had gone. If she went to his house and shot his wife, she wondered, would he marry her? But she could never shoot anyone. She was a good person, she thought. She just had bad luck. That's why she had to do things that good people did not do, or said they did not do. Florence knew that everybody did bad things sometimes. And she was only trying to save Mr. J.L.B. Matacone from that fat detective woman, who shouldn't try to take what wasn't hers. A few years in prison would teach that woman a lesson. I have got a gun, thought Florence. Now I need to put the gun into a house in Zebra Drive. She needed someone else to help her. Fortunately, a man called Paul had borrowed money from her 2 years ago. It was not a lot of money, but he had never paid it back. Perhaps he had forgotten about it, but Florence had not forgotten, and now she would remind him. And Paul had a wife who did not know about his secret visits to Mr. J.L.B. Matacone's house. If he refused, she could say she was going to tell the wife. When she reminded him of the money, Paul said he could not pay it back. My wife knows about every pooler I spend, he said. One of our children is always ill. We have to pay the hospital a lot of money, but I will pay you back one day. I can forget the money if you do something for me, she said. Just go to an empty house, break a window in the kitchen, and go inside. I am not a robber, he said. I do not steal. I am not asking you to steal. I want you to put something in the house. It's just a package that I want to keep in a safe place. At last, he agreed. He would do it the next afternoon, when everybody was at work. She knew that the maid would not be there, and there was no dog. She gave him the package. He did not know what it was, but it was heavy, and he began to have doubts. Don't ask, she said. Don't ask, and you won't know. It's a gun, he thought, She wants me to put a gun in the house in Zebra Drive. I don't want to carry this with me, he said. It's very dangerous. I know it's a gun, and I don't want the police to catch me with it. I will fetch it from you at the Mattaconi house tomorrow. She thought for a moment. She could carry the gun to Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi's house in the shopping bag. Paul could take it from her there. The important thing was to put it in the Ramotswe house, and then, 2 days later, to make that telephone call to the police. "All right," she said. "Come at 2:30 tomorrow. He'll be at the garage then." She put the package back in the shopping bag. "You have been a good man. Now I want to make you happy." "No," he said. "I am too nervous to be happy. Maybe some other time." The following afternoon, Paul Monosopati, an employee of the Gaborone Sun Hotel, and a man who was expecting promotion, made a telephone call. "Now, listen to me, Ra," he said to the man at the other end. "I cannot speak for long, but I am against crime." "That's good," said the policeman. "If you go to a house on the way to the old airport, you will find a woman with a gun. She sells them. You will catch her if you go now. The gun does not belong to the man who owns the house. It is the woman's gun. She will have it with her in the kitchen in a white shopping bag." He gave the address of the house and then put down the telephone. At the other end of the line, the policeman smiled. This would be an easy arrest, he thought. There should be a reward for good citizens who reported crimes like this, he thought. 500 pula at least. Chapter 10. Family. Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi looked up at the empty sky. Then he looked down. Ma Ramotswe was still there, not understanding what she saw. She knew that he worked for the orphan farm. She would think he was taking 2 orphans out for the day. She would not imagine that he had 2 foster children, and that they would soon be her foster children too. "What are you doing?" she said simply. It was a reasonable question. Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi looked at the children. The girl had put her photograph into the plastic bag on the side of her wheelchair. The boy was holding his photograph tightly, afraid perhaps that Ma Ramotswe would take it away from him. "These are 2 children from the orphan farm," said Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi with a weak voice. The girl smiled and greeted Ma Ramotswe politely. "I am called Motalele," she said. "My brother is called Puso. These are the names that we were given at the orphan farm." "I hope they are looking after you well," said Ma Ramotswe. "Ma Potakwane is a kind lady." "She is kind," said the girl. "Very kind." Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi spoke quickly. "I have had the children's photographs taken," he explained. "Show yours to Ma Ramotswe, Motalele." The girl pushed her wheelchair forward and gave her photograph to Ma Ramotswe. "That is a very nice photograph to have," she said. "Is Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi taking you back now, or are you going to eat in town?" "We have been shopping," Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi said quickly. "We may have 1 or 2 more things to do." "We will go back to his house soon," the girl said. "We are living with Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi now." Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi felt his heart jump. "I am going to have a heart attack and die now," he thought. Ma Ramotswe looked at Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. "They are staying at your house?" she said. "This is something new. Have they just come?" "Yesterday," he said slowly. Ma Ramotswe looked down at the children and then at Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. "I think we should have a talk," she said. "You children stay here for a moment. Mr. J.L.B. Matacone and I are going to the post office." He followed her into the post office with his head down, like a schoolboy who had been caught doing something wrong. She would not marry him now. He had lost her because he had been dishonest and stupid, and it was all Ma Potokwane's fault. Ma Ramotswe put down her basket of letters. "Why did you not tell me about these children?" she asked. He could not look at her. "I was going to tell you," he said. "I was at the orphan farm yesterday. The water pump was broken. It's very old, and it will have to be changed soon." "Yes, yes," said Ma Ramotswe. "But what about these children?" "Ma Potokwane is a very strong woman," he said. "She told me I should take some foster children. I did not want to do it before I talked to you, but she did not listen to me. She brought the children to meet me. I had no choice." "So," she said, "you agreed to take these children, and now they think they are going to stay." "Yes, I suppose that is true," he said quietly. "And for how long?" Mr. J.L.B. Matacone took a deep breath. "For as long as they need a home, that is what I offered them." To his surprise, Mr. J.L.B. Matacone began to feel more confident. He had done nothing wrong. He had not stolen anything or killed anyone. He had just offered to change the lives of 2 poor children. If Ma Ramotswe did not like that, there was nothing he could do about it now. Ma Ramotswe suddenly laughed. "Well, Mr. J.L.B. Matacone," she said, "nobody can say you are not a kind man. You are, I think, the kindest man in Botswana. I do not know anybody else who would do that." Mr. J.L.B. Matacone stared at her. "You are not cross?" "I was," she said, "but only for a short time. 1 minute maybe. But then I thought, do I want to marry the kindest man in Botswana? I do. Can I be a mother to these children? I can. That is what I thought, Mr. J.L.B. Matacone." He looked at her, not believing what he had heard. "You are a very kind woman yourself, Ma." "We must not stand here and talk about kindness," she said. "There are 2 children there. Let's take them back to Zebra Drive and show them where they are going to live. Then this afternoon I can collect them from your house and bring them to my home. My home is more—" She stopped herself, but he did not mind. "I know your house is more comfortable than mine," he said. "And it would be better for them if you looked after them." They walked back to the children together. "I'm going to marry this lady," said Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. "She will be your mother soon." The boy looked surprised, but the girl lowered her eyes politely. "Thank you, Ma," she said. "We shall try to be good children." "That is good," said Ma Ramotswe. "We shall be a very happy family. I know it already." Ma Ramotswe and the boy drove off in her little white van. Mr. J.L.B. Matacone took the girl in his pickup. When he got to Zebra Drive, Ma Ramotswe and Puso were waiting for them. The boy was excited and ran to greet his sister. "This is a very good house," he shouted. "Look, there are trees and fruit. I will have a room at the back." Mr. J.L.B. Matacone let Mara Motsway show the children around the house. Her father, Obed Ramotswe, had done a very fine job, he thought. He had given Botswana one of its finest ladies. While Mara Motswe was making lunch for the children, Mr. J.L.B. Matacone telephoned the garage. The younger assistant answered. His voice was high and excited. "I am glad that you telephoned, Ra," he said. "The police came. They wanted to speak to you about your maid. She had a gun in her bag, and they have arrested her." That was all the assistant knew, and so Mr. J.L.B. Matacone put down the telephone. His maid had had a gun. He knew she was lazy and dishonest. But this... was she going to kill someone? He went into the kitchen. "My maid has been arrested by the police," he told Mara Motsway. "She had a gun in her bag." Mara Motsway put down her spoon. "I am not surprised," she said. "That woman was very dishonest." Mr. J.L.B. Matacone and Mara Motsway decided to spend the rest of the day with the children. Mr. J.L.B. Matacone telephoned his assistants and told them to close the garage until the next morning. "I told them to use the time to study," he said to Mara Motsway. "But they won't study. They will go and chase girls. There is nothing in those young men's heads." "Many young people are like that," said Mara Motsway. "They think only of dances and clothes and loud music. We were like that too, remember?" Mara Motsway called the No. 1 Ladies' Detective Agency. Mama Kutsi answered and said that she had completed her report on the Badule matter. They would have to talk about that, Mara Motsway told her. Lunch was ready, though. It was time to sit down to eat as a family for the first time. "We are grateful for this food," said Mara Motsway. "There are brothers and sisters who do not have good food on their table. We think of them and wish them food in the future. And we thank the Lord who has brought these children into our lives so we can all be happy and the children can have a home with us. And we think of the mother and father of these children who are watching us from above." Mr. J.L.B. Matacone's heart was so full of emotion that he could say nothing. So he was silent. Chapter 11. Oswald Ranter. "I have read your report," said Mara Motsway, when Mama Kutsi arrived for work the next morning. "It is complete and well written." "Thank you, Ma," said Mama Kutsi. "I am happy that my first case was not a difficult one. I mean, it was not difficult to find out what we needed to know. But those questions at the end of my report, they are difficult. I don't know how to solve them." "Yes," said Mara Motsway, looking at the report. "They are difficult for me too. I am older than you, but I do not have the answer to every problem that comes along." "But what can we do?" said Mama Kutsi. "If we tell Mr. Badule about this man, he may make trouble. Then the boy might not get money for school. That would not be good for the boy." "I know," said Mara Motsway. "But we cannot lie to Mr. Badule. A detective must not lie to a client." "Yes, but should we tell him everything? We could say, 'You are right. Your wife is seeing another man,' and stop there. We are not lying, are we? We are just not telling all the truth." In this case, thought Mara Motsway, The most important thing was what happened to the boy. He should not suffer just because his mother had behaved badly. But was anyone really unhappy in this situation? The well-dressed wife was happy because she had a rich man to buy her clothes. The rich man was happy because he had a stylish lady friend. The religious wife was happy because she could live in her village and her husband came home every weekend. The boy was happy because he was going to an expensive school. "It's Mr. Budule," said Mara Motsway. "We have to make him happy. We have to tell him what is happening, but we must make him accept it. If he accepts it, then the whole problem goes away." Mama Kutsi was not sure that this was possible, but she was happy that Mara Motsway had made a decision, and she would not have to tell any lies. But there were other cases too. Mrs. Curtin had sent a letter, asking Mara Motsway if she had found anything out about her son. "I have the feeling," she wrote, "that you will discover something for me." Mara Motsway knew that the young man had died on the commune. Someone had harmed the boy, and now she had to find someone who could do harm. Mr. Oswald Ranter. The little white van entered the university car park. Mara Motsway got out and looked around. She passed the university every day, but she had never been inside. She had not gone to university. But here there were teachers and doctors, people who had written books, people whose heads contained more knowledge than the heads of most people. She found a map of the university on a wall. The Department of Mathematics was here. The Department of Engineering was over there. And there, something called information. She went looking for information and came to a small building near the African Languages Department. Mara Motsway knocked on the door and went inside. A thin woman was sitting behind a desk. She looked bored. "I am looking for Mr. Ranter," said Mara Motsway. "I believe he works here." "Dr. Ranter," said the woman. "He is not just Mr. Ranter, he is Dr. Ranter." "I am sorry," said Mara Motsway. "Where is he, please?" "He is here one moment, and then he is gone. That's Dr. Ranter. But you could try his office. He has an office here. But most of the time, he spends in the bedroom." "Oh," said Mara Motsway. "He is a ladies' man, this Dr. Ranter." "You could say that," said the woman. "And one day the university will catch him. But until then, nobody dares complain." So often, thought Mara Motsway, other people did your work for you, as this woman was now doing. "Why do people not complain?" she asked. "The girls are afraid to speak," said the woman. "And the other teachers all have secrets too. There are a lot of people like Dr. Ranter here. I can say this because I'm leaving tomorrow. I have found a better job." Then the woman told her how to find Dr. Ranter's office. As she was leaving, Mara Motsway had an idea. "Perhaps, Ma, Dr. Ranter has done nothing wrong," she said. She saw immediately that it was going to work. The woman had suffered because of Dr. Ranter. "Oh, yes, he has," she said angrily. "He showed an examination paper to a student if she would do what he wanted. I know because the student was my cousin's daughter." "But can you prove this?" asked Mara Motsway. "No," she said. "He would lie, and then nothing would happen." And this girl, Margaret, what did she do?" "Margaret? Who is Margaret?" "Your cousin's daughter," said Ma Ramotswe. "She's not called Margaret," said the woman. "She's called Angel. She did nothing, and he was never caught. Men never get caught, do they?" "Sometimes they do," Ma Ramotswe thought. But she only said goodbye and went to look for Dr. Ranter's office. The door was slightly open. Ma Ramotswe listened and heard the sound of someone typing on a computer keyboard. Dr. Ranter was in. He looked up quickly as she knocked on the door and opened it more. "Yes, Ma?" he said. "What do you want?" "I would like to speak to you, Ra. Have you got a moment?" He looked at his watch. "Yes," he said politely, "but I haven't got a lot of time. Are you a student?" Ma Ramotswe sat down. "No, I am not. I have not been to university. I was busy working for my cousin's husband's company." "It is never too late, Ma," he said. "We have some very old students here. Of course, you are not very old, but I mean that anybody can study." "Maybe," she said. "Maybe one day." "You can study many things here." "Can someone study to be a detective?" He looked surprised. "Detective? You can't study that at a university." "But I have read that you can at universities in America." "Oh, yes. At American universities, you can study anything, swimming if you like, but not at the good universities. I studied at Duke, a very good American university." He paused. "He wants me to admire him," thought Ma Ramotswe. "That is why he needs all the girls. He needs people to admire him." "I would like to spend more time talking with you, Ma," he said, smiling, "but I am busy, so I must ask you what this is about." "I am sorry to take your time, Ra," she said. "I am sure you are very busy. I am just a lady detective." He stopped smiling. "You are a detective?" His voice was colder now. "It is only a small agency, the #1 ladies' detective agency. It is over by Carley Hill. Perhaps you have seen it." "I do not go over there," he said, looking nervous. "Why do you want to talk to me? Has someone told you to come and speak to me?" "No. I have come to ask you about something that happened a long time ago. 10 years ago." He stared at her. She thought she could smell fear on him. 10 years is a long time. People do not remember. "No," she agreed. "They forget. But some things are difficult to forget. For example, a mother will not forget her son." As she spoke, he changed again. He got up from his chair and laughed. "Oh," he said. "I see now. It's that American woman, the one who always asks questions. She is paying you to dig up the past again. Will she never stop? Will she never learn?" "Learn what?" asked Ma Ramotswe. He was standing at the window, looking at the students on the path below. "Learn that there is nothing to learn," he said. "That boy is dead. Probably lost in the Kalahari. He went for a walk and never came back. It's easy to get lost in the desert, you know. All the trees look the same, and there are no hills to guide you, so you get lost, especially if you're a white man in a foreign land." "But I don't believe that he got lost and died." said Ma Ramotswe. I believe something else happened to him. He turned to look at her. For example? He said angrily. I am not sure, she said. How could I know? I wasn't there. She paused, and then added quietly, But you were. She could hear his breathing as he returned to his chair. From the window, she could hear the students outside laughing and shouting. You say I was there, he said, staring at her. What do you mean? She stared back. I mean that you were living there. You saw him every day. You saw him on the day that he died. I'm sure you know something. I told the police, and I have told the Americans who came asking questions. I saw him that morning once, and I saw him at lunch. I told them what we had for lunch. I described the clothes he was wearing. I told them everything. He was lying, thought Ma Ramotswe. It was easy to see. How could other people not know he was lying? I do not believe you, Ra, she said. You are lying to me. He opened his mouth slightly, then closed it. Our talk has ended, Ma, he said. I am sorry, I cannot help you. Very well, Ra, said Ma Ramotswe. But you could help that poor American woman. She is a mother. You had a mother. But I know that you do not care. And not just because she is a white woman from America. If she was a woman from your own village, you wouldn't care about her, would you? He smiled at her. We have finished our talk. But people can sometimes be made to care, she said. In a minute, I am going to telephone the university police. I think I will say that you were trying to steal something. They would come quickly. It might be difficult for you, Ma. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Ra, she said. You see, I know all about Angel. Her words had an immediate effect. He sat up straight in his chair, and she could smell the fear again. This time it was stronger. Yes, she said. I know about Angel and the examination paper. I have a letter that describes everything that happened. It is back in my office right now. What are you going to do, Ra? What will you do in Gaborone if you lose your university job? Will you go back to your village? Help with the cows again? Blackmail, she thought. That was what she was doing, blackmail. And this is what a blackmailer feels. The feeling of complete power over another person. You cannot do that. I will say I didn't do it. You cannot prove anything. But I can prove it, she said. There is Angel, and there is another girl who will lie and say that you gave her examination questions too. She is cross with you, and she will lie. There will be two girls with the same story. His lips were dry, she noticed. He moved his tongue over them. His shirt was wet under the arms. I do not like doing this, Ra, she said. But this is my job. Sometimes I have to do things like this. There is a very sad American woman who only wants to say goodbye to her son. You don't care about her, but I do. I think her feelings are more important than yours. So I am going to offer you something. You tell me what happened. If you do, I promise you that Angel and her friend will say nothing. His breathing was strange now, short, quick breaths. I did not kill him, he said. I did not kill him. Now you are speaking the truth, said Mara Motsway. But you must tell me what happened and where his body is. That is what I want to know. Are you going to the police? He asked. No. This story is just for his mother. That is all. He closed his eyes. I cannot talk here. You can come to my house. I will come this evening. No, he said. Tomorrow evening. I shall come this evening, she said. That woman has waited for 10 years. She must not wait any longer. All right. I shall write down the address. You can come tonight at 9 o'clock. I shall come at 8, said Mara Motsway. Not every woman will do what you tell her to do. She felt her heart jumping as she walked back to the little white van. She did not know where she had found the strength, but it had been there, deep inside her. Chapter 12. At Tlocwen Road Speedy Motors. While Mara Motsway was blackmailing Dr. Oswald Ranter, for good reasons of course, Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi took his 2 foster children to the garage for the afternoon. The girl, Motilele, wanted to see him work, and he had agreed. A garage was not a good place for children, with all those heavy tools and machines. But he could ask one of the assistants to look after them while he was working. A visit to the garage might make the boy more interested in mechanical work. He parked in front of his office door, and the boy ran off immediately. Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi had to call him back. This place is dangerous, he warned. You must stay with one of the boys over there. He called over the younger assistant. Stop what you are doing and watch these 2 while I am working. Make sure they don't get hurt. The assistant smiled at the children. He seemed happy with his new job. He's the lazy one, thought Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi. The garage was busy. A football team's bus needed work. With the help of the other assistant, Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi took the engine out of the bus. Motilele watched them carefully from her wheelchair. Her brother looked once, and then looked away. He began to draw pictures in a pool of oil on the ground. When Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi paused in his work, Motilele asked, What is happening now, Ra? Are you going to change those rings? Are they important? Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi looked at the boy. Do you see what I am doing, Puso? The boy smiled weakly. He is drawing a picture of a house in the oil, said the younger assistant. May I come closer? Asked the girl. I will not get in the way. Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi agreed, and she pushed her wheelchair closer. He showed her the part of the engine that he was working on. You hold this for me, he said, and she held the tool he gave her. Good. Now turn it. Not too much. Good. He put the tool back in the toolbox and looked at her. Her eyes were bright with interest. He could see that she loved engines. His younger assistant did not, and that was why he would never be a good mechanic. But this girl, this strange, serious girl, could become a good mechanic. He had never seen a girl become a mechanic. But why not? People thought detectives were always men, but look at Mara Motsway. Motilele looked at him politely. You are not cross with me, Ra, she said. I am not annoying you. He put his hand gently on her arm. Of course I am not cross, he said. I am proud. I am proud that I have a daughter who will be a great mechanic. Is that what you want?"
"Yes, I have always loved engines," she said. "But I have never had the chance to do anything."
"That will change now," said Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. "You can come with me on Saturday mornings and help me here. Would you like that? We can make a special workplace for you, a low one, so you can sit in your chair and work."
"You are very kind, Ra," she said.
When they had finally put the engine back, Motolelli smiled.
"That bus is happy now," she said.
Mr. J.L.B. Matacone looked at her proudly. He was no longer worried about the future of Tlockweng Road Speedy Motors. Chapter 13. Michael Curtin. Mara Motsway felt afraid. She had been afraid only once or twice before in her work as Botswana's only lady detective. Ma Makutsi, she thought, was only an assistant detective. Of course, there was no real reason to be afraid to go to Dr. Ranter's house. There would be neighbours next door. There would be the lights of cars in the road. Dr. Ranter was a ladies' man, not a murderer. But sometimes, very ordinary people can be murderers. She had read that most people knew the person who murdered them. Mothers killed their children. Husbands killed their wives. Wives killed their husbands. Employees killed their employers. Perhaps murder happened in exactly this situation, a quiet talk in a small house, while people did ordinary things just a short distance away. Mr. J.L.B. Matacone knew that something was wrong with Mara Motsway. He had come to dinner to tell her about his visit to his maid, who was now in prison. He decided to tell his story first, to take her mind off her problem, whatever it was. "I have asked a lawyer to see Florence," he said. Mara Motsway put a large serving of beans on Mr. J.L.B. Matacone's plate. "Did she explain anything?" she asked. "She was shouting when I first arrived," he said. "The guard said, 'Please control your wife and tell her to shut her big mouth.' I had to tell them twice that she was not my wife." "But why was she shouting?" asked Mara Motsway. "She is a silly woman, but I'm sure she knows that shouting won't help her." "She knows that, I think," said Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. "She was shouting because she was so cross. She said something else, too. She said your name. I don't know why." "And the gun? Did she explain the gun?" "She said the gun did not belong to her. She said that it belonged to a boyfriend and that he was coming to collect it. Then she said that she didn't know it was in her bag. She thought it was a package of meat." "Nobody will believe that," said Mara Motsway. "That's what the lawyer said to me on the telephone," said Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. "The courts don't believe people who say they did not know they had a gun. They send them to prison for at least a year." Mr. J.L.B. Matacone looked at Mara Motsway. She was nervous about something. In a marriage, it would be important not to have secrets. Of course, he had kept his 2 foster children a secret from Mara Motsway. But now they should have no secrets. "Mara Motsway," he said, "you are thinking about something. Is something wrong? Is it something I have said?" She looked at her watch. "It's not about you," she said. "I have to speak to somebody tonight. It's about Ma Curtin's son. I am worried about this person that I have to see." She told him about Dr. Ranter. She said that she did not think he would murder her, but she could not be sure. He listened quietly,
When she had finished, he said, "You cannot go. I cannot let my future wife do something dangerous like that." She looked at him. "It makes me very pleased to know that you are worried about me. But I am a detective. This is my job." Mr. J.L.B. Matacone looked unhappy. "If you go, then I shall go too. I shall wait outside. He need not know I am there." "All right," she said. "We will take my van. You can wait outside while I am talking to him." "And if there is a problem, you can shout," he said. They finished the meal, both of them feeling better. Mr. J.L.B. Matacone took the plates to the kitchen, and Mara Motswe went to look at the children. Motilele had been reading to her brother in his bedroom. Now Puso was almost asleep, and the girl was sleepy herself. "It is time for you to go to bed too," she said to the girl. "Mr. J.L.B. Matacone says you have had a busy day fixing engines." She pushed Motilele back to her own room, and the girl got into bed. "Are you happy here, Motilele?" she asked. "I am so happy," said the girl. "And every day my life is getting happier." They were parked outside Dr. Ranter's house. "I will be ready," said Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. "If you shout, I will hear you." They looked at the house. It was an ordinary house with an untidy garden. Dr. Ranter clearly did not employ a gardener, thought Mara Motswe. This was wrong. A person with a good job, like Dr. Ranter, should employ people at home. There were so many people who needed work. "He is selfish," said Mara Motswe. "That's exactly what I was thinking," said Mr. J.L.B. Matacone. She opened the door of the van and got out. Mr. J.L.B. Matacone watched her walk to the front door and knock. Dr. Ranter had been waiting. He quickly opened the door, and she went inside. "Is your friend in the van coming in, Ma?" said Dr. Ranter. "No," she said. "He will wait for me outside." Dr. Ranter laughed. "So you will feel safe?" She did not answer his question. "You have a nice house," she said. "You are fortunate." He led her into the living room, and they sat down. "I don't want to waste time talking to you," he said. "I will speak only because you are making trouble for me, and because someone is lying about me." He was hurt, thought Mara Motswe. He had been beaten, and by a woman. That would be very embarrassing for a man like him. "How did Michael Curtin die?" she asked. "I worked there," he began. "I was studying what they were doing for the university, but I knew their commune would fail. I knew it would not work. I lived in the big house. The boss was a German, Burkhard Fischer. He had a wife, Marcia. There was also a South African woman, Carla Smith, and the American boy. We were all friends, except that Burkhard did not like me. He tried to make me leave, but he couldn't. I was working for the university. He told lies about me, but they didn't believe him. The American boy was very polite. He could speak some Setswana, and people liked him. The South African woman liked him too. Soon they were sharing the same room. She did everything for him. She cooked his food, cleaned his clothes. Then she became interested in me. I didn't make her do it, but she was with me at the same time that she was with that boy. She said she wanted to tell him, but she didn't want to hurt him. So we saw each other secretly. Burkhart guessed what was happening. He called me into his office and said he would tell the American boy if I didn't stop seeing Carla. He became angry and said he would complain about me to the university. So I told him I would stop seeing Carla. But I did not. Why should I? We met each other in the evenings. She told the boy that she liked walking in the bush at night. He didn't, because he thought it was dangerous, so he did not go with her. We had a place where we went to be alone together. It was a small hut in the fields. That night, we were in the hut together. There was a full moon outside. I heard someone outside, and I opened the door very slowly. The American boy was outside. He said, "What are you doing here?" I said nothing, and then he saw Carla. Of course, then he knew what was happening. At first he didn't say anything. Then he began to run, not back to the big house, but into the bush. Carla shouted for me to go after him, so I did. He ran fast. I caught him once, but he got away. I followed him through the bush and cut myself on the arms and legs. It was very dangerous. I caught him again, but he pulled away from me. We were on the edge of a deep ditch. He fell into the ditch. I looked down and saw him lying on the ground. He was not moving. I climbed down and looked at him. He had broken his neck when he fell, and he was not breathing. I ran back to Carla and told her what had happened. She came back with me to the ditch. He was clearly dead, and she started to scream. When she had stopped screaming, we talked about what to do. I said that if we reported what had happened, nobody would believe that it was an accident. People would say that we had had a fight about Carla, and that I killed him. I knew Burkhart would say bad things about me to the police. So we decided to bury the body and say that we knew nothing about it. There were some anthills near us, so I hid the body inside one and covered it with leaves and stones. I did a good job, because the game tracker never found it. The police asked us questions, and we both said nothing. She became very quiet and did not want to see me anymore. After some time, she left. She told me that she was going to have a child. His child, not mine. I left too, 1 month later. I went to study at Duke University. She did not go back to South Africa. I heard that she went to Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, and that she found a job running a hotel there. I think she is still there. He stopped and looked at Ma Ramotswe. "That is the truth, Ma," he said. "I did not kill him. I have told you the truth." "I know," said Ma Ramotswe. She paused. "I am not going to tell the police. I promised you that I would not. But I am going to tell the mother what happened. I will ask her to make the same promise, not to go to the police." "And those girls?" asked Dr. Ranter. "They won't make trouble for me?" "No," said Ma Ramotswe. "There will be no trouble." "But what about the letter?" he asked. "The one from the other girl?" Ma Ramotswe got up and opened the front door. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni was sitting in the van. He looked up when she opened the door. She walked out of the house. "Well, Dr. Ranter," she said quietly, "I think you are a man who has lied to a lot of people, especially to women. Now something new has happened to you. A woman has lied to you, and you have believed her. There was no girl." She walked to the van. Dr. Ranter stood at the door watching her. She knew he would not hurt her. Actually, if he had a conscience, he should be grateful to her. Now, finally, the events of 10 years ago could rest in peace. But she doubted that he had much of a conscience. Chapter 14. Bulawayo. She left early, when the sky was still dark. She drove the little white van along the Francistown Road. Just before she passed the road to Mochudi, the sun came up. For a few minutes, the whole world was gold. The tree, the grass, the dust. The sun was a great red ball in the sky. It went up slowly over Africa. As it did, the natural colours of the world returned. Mara Motswe liked the drive to Francistown, although today she was going further, over the border and into Zimbabwe. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni had not wanted her to go. "It is more dangerous than Botswana," he had said. "What will happen if your van breaks down?" She did not like him to worry, but it was important to make it clear. She would make the decisions in these matters. You could not let the husband make decisions for the number one ladies' detective agency. It was not called the number one ladies and husbands detective agency. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni was a good mechanic, but he was not a detective. So she was driving to Bulawayo. By 9 o'clock, she was passing through Mahalepe, where her father, Obed Ramotswe, had been born. If the little white van broke down, she could knock on any door and expect to receive help. She stopped at Francistown and drank a cup of tea at a hotel. Then she crossed the border and drove into Bulawayo, a town of wide streets and leafy trees. She would stay with a friend here. It was easy to find the South African woman. Mara Motswe's friend made some telephone calls and got the name and address of the hotel. It was an old but well-kept building, and there was a noisy bar somewhere inside. There was a sign with the name of the hotel manager, Carla Smith. This was the end of the search. "I'm Carla, and you are—" Mara Motswe looked at the woman sitting behind an untidy desk. "She thinks I have come for a job," she thought. "My name is Precious Ramotswe," she said. "I'm from Gaborone, and I have not come to ask for a job." The woman smiled. "So many people do," she said. "There is such terrible unemployment." "We are lucky down there in Botswana," said Mara Motswe. "We do not have these troubles." "I know," said Carla. "I lived there for a couple of years. It was a long time ago. But I hear that things haven't changed much in Botswana. That's why you are lucky." "You preferred the old Africa?" Carla answered carefully. "I was a South African, but I did not like apartheid. I left South Africa to get away from it. Not all white people liked apartheid, you know." Mara Motswe had not wanted to embarrass her. "I didn't mean that," she said. "I meant the old Africa, where there were fewer people without jobs. People had a place then. They belonged to their village, to their family. They had their lands." Carla relaxed. "Yes, but we cannot stop the world, can we? Africa has these problems now. We have to try to solve them." Mara Motswe looked at her hands and began speaking. 10 years ago, you lived out near Molopolole. You were there when an American named Michael Curtin disappeared." She stopped. Carla was staring at her with wide eyes. "I am not the police," said Mara Motswe quickly. "I have not come here to question you." Then why do you want to talk about that? It happened a long time ago. He disappeared, that's all.
No, said Mara Motsway. That is not all. I know what happened. You and Oswald Ranter were there, in that hut, when Michael found you. He fell into a ditch and broke his neck. You hid the body because Oswald was afraid that the police would think he killed Michael. That is what happened.
Carla said nothing, but Mara Motsway could see that she was shocked. Dr. Ranter had told the truth.
You did not kill Michael, she said, but you hid the body. Because of that, his mother never knew what had happened to him. That was the wrong thing to do. But you can make things better, and you can do it safely.
What can I do? Said Carla quietly.
You can end his mother's search, she said. She only wants to say goodbye to her son. She just wants to know, that's all.
I don't know, said Carla. Oswald would be angry.
Mara Motsway interrupted her. Oswald agrees.
Then why can't he tell her? Said Carla, suddenly angry. He did it. I only lied to protect him.
Yes, said Mara Motsway. It's his fault, but he is not a good man. He cannot say he is sorry. But you can. You can meet this woman and tell her what happened, and you can tell her that you are sorry.
Carla looked down. I don't see why. It's been such a long time.
Mara Motsway stopped her. And you are the mother of her grandchild, aren't you? Mark Curtin has no son now, but there is a
boy, said Carla. He is called Michael too. He is 9, almost 10.
Mara Motsway smiled. You must bring the child to her, Ma, she said. You are a mother. You know what that means.
Mara Motsway got up and walked over to the woman's desk.
You know you must do this, she said. She took the woman's hand and held it gently. It was dark, from sun and heat and hard work. Mark Curtin is ready to come to Botswana, she said. She will come in a day or 2 if I tell her. Can you leave this place just for a few days?
I have an assistant, said Carla. She can run the hotel.
And the boy, Michael? Won't he be happy to see his grandmother?
Carla looked up at her. Yes, Mara Motsway, she said. You are right.
Mara Motsway returned to Gaborone late the next day. Her maid, Rose, had stayed in the house to look after the children. They were asleep when Mara Motsway arrived home. She went to their bedroom and listened to their soft breathing as they slept. Then, tired from the drive, she went to bed. She was in the office early the next morning. Rose would take care of the children. Ma Makutsi had arrived before her and was sitting at her desk, typing a report.
Mr. Badule, she said, I am reporting the end of the case.
I thought you wanted me to handle that, said Mara Motsway.
I was not brave enough at first, said Ma Makutsi. But he came in yesterday. You were not here, and I had to talk to him.
And? Asked Mara Motsway.
And I told him that his wife was seeing another man.
What did he say?
He was upset. He looked very sad.
That's not surprising, said Mara Motsway.
Yes, but then I told him he should not do anything. I said his wife was not seeing this man for her own pleasure. I said she was doing it for the son. She was seeing a rich man so his son would go to a good school. Ma Ramotswe was surprised. He believed that? She said. Yes, said Ma Makutsi. He seemed pleased. So now he is happy, his wife is happy, and the boy can stay in the private school. And the wife's lover and the wife's lover's wife are also happy. It is a good result. Ma Ramotswe was not so sure. There was something wrong with this solution. She would have to talk about it with Ma Makutsi when they had more time. Some days passed with no new clients. Ma Makutsi cleaned her typewriter and bought some new tea things. Ma Ramotswe wrote letters to old friends and added up the company's money. There was not a lot, but they were not losing money, and she had been happy and had done interesting things. That was as important as making a lot of money. 3 days later, Andrea Curtin arrived. In the office of the No. 1 Ladies Detective Agency, Mrs. Curtin met her grandson and his mother. While Carla told her what had happened 10 years ago, Ma Ramotswe took the boy for a walk. He was a serious, polite boy, and he seemed interested in stones. As they walked, he stopped to look at or pick up small rocks. "I want to study geology," he told Ma Ramotswe. "There is a geologist who stays in our hotel sometimes. He shows me how to find interesting rocks." Ma Ramotswe smiled. "That's like being a detective," she said, "looking for things." When they returned, Carla and Mrs. Curtin were sitting together. The older woman looked peaceful and happy. Ma Ramotswe knew that she had found what she was looking for. They drank tea together quietly. The boy had a gift for his grandmother, a small stone animal which he had made himself. She took it and kissed him, just like any other grandmother. Ma Ramotswe also had a gift for the American woman. It was a basket that she had bought on her way back from Bulawayo, from a woman sitting by the road. The woman was poor, and Ma Ramotswe had wanted to help her. It was a traditional Botswana basket, with a traditional picture on its side. She explained the picture to Mrs. Curtin. "This is a giraffe, and these little marks are the tears of the giraffe. The giraffe gives its tears to the women, and they put them in the basket." The American woman took the basket politely, with both hands, in the correct Botswana way. "You are very kind, Ma," she said. "But why did the giraffe give its tears?" Ma Ramotswe was surprised. She had never thought about it. "I suppose it means that we can all give something," she said. "A giraffe has nothing else to give, only its tears." Did it really mean that, she wondered? For a moment, she imagined a giraffe looking down from the trees. She thought of the beauty that there was in Africa, and the love. The boy looked at the basket. "Is that true, Ma?" Ma Ramotswe smiled. "I hope so," she said.